Guys, we're back. It's 1993, in the year that Jake and I watched a bunch of movies. This is Never Did It. I'm Brad Garoon. I'm here with Jake Ziegler. We're getting right to it because we've got some heavy-duty movies to talk about this week. If this is your first time here, Never Did It is a show where Jake and I go back over the past 100 years of filmmaking, and for each year, we recommend a film for the other to watch that the other hasn't seen before. That's going to be embarrassing for me in just a little bit. This year, we just happen to recommend two heavy-duty movies. I recommended that you watch Falling Down. I'll get into why and all that in a bit, but what were your first impressions of the Michael Douglas vehicle helmed by Joel Schumacher, Falling Down?
Well, Joel Schumacher is divisive, to say the least, and I think hit and miss is a little more fair because he does have a couple of really good movies, and I think this is definitely one of them. One of my very first impressions, though, when it was over, is that I feel like this would definitely be a movie that perhaps the less intellectually inclined may enjoy for the wrong reasons. There's definitely an element of that to it, but it's also one that after it was over, I was like, I knew I had liked the movie, but the more and more I thought about it, I actually ended up liking it more the more I thought about it. I think it's a really, really good Michael Douglas performance. We've already talked about a couple on this podcast. I know we've gone through Wall Street and Wonder Boys that are both also great performances, and I think this is another one, also very different from those two movies. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting part. I think it's a really interesting movie. I think it's really interesting to watch 30 years later to see, compare it to what we have going on today. I'm a little embarrassed that I had never seen this one. I know a lot of people have seen it and a lot of people have loved this movie.
So I think this movie falls in the same category, even though it's way better. The same people are fans of it as who are fans of Boondock Saints, because it's an aggressive movie that hits the I'm mad at society, I'm going to go out on my own and do what I want to get my satisfaction bone in your body. I think the messages of the two movies are very different. I think the portrayals of the people who are aggressive in the two movies are very different. It's funny, you said when you were describing what you thought of the movie, you said interesting like 5 times.
You really?
And I found that interesting because it's not a movie that's super fun to watch unless you're, like you said, a dum-dum. Like if you're a real dum-dum, it is fun to watch someone beat up a couple gangsters, almost give a shopkeeper who's charging too much a heart attack, pick on people working at a fast food restaurant, and then kill a Nazi, and then try to do whatever you want to your ex. That seems like a fun thing if you're a piece of garbage. If you're a normal functioning human being, that's a disturbing thing to watch.
It is.
I've always loved this movie. This was, I think, my first real exposure to Michael Douglas. To me, he's always been the guy from Falling Down. And I think this might be his best performance because he's not cool in any way. I mean, even the people who like this movie for the wrong reasons, and I don't know if those voices are so loud. I don't think they're looking at Michael Douglas and thinking, what a cool guy in his short sleeve button down, looking like Dwight Schrute going through Los Angeles, causing trouble.
Yeah.
So I watched this, I would guess like 2 years after it came out. I think I probably watched it in 1995 on television. So I'm in 5th grade and being like, whoa, this is a crazy, crazy movie. Just a quick rundown of what it's about for the 5 of you who might not know what this is. The movie starts with Michael Douglas's character who goes unnamed for most of the movie to give a sense that he could be anyone, which makes this even scarier. He's in a traffic jam and you feel, it's such a great scene, the opening where he's in the traffic jam and you feel the heat of the LA summer. And
it's sticky.
Yeah, right. It's sticky. It's gross.
Yeah.
Everyone around him is disgusting or annoying. There's kids on a bus that are being too loud. There's guys in a car behind him who are being rude. One of whom I was sure was Tony Goldwyn. Definitely not.
I thought so too. I was like, oh man, who's that? That's that guy. And then I looked, no, it's not him.
I'm really glad because I was like, am I crazy? It's Tony Goldwyn.
No, you're not. I thought the same thing.
And then we find out later, surprisingly, is a police officer. It's his last day on the job. He's about to retire. He is McBain's best friend. And we find out later that their stories will be very intertwined. But this is the inciting incident for this guy who is in the credits as Defense, which is what is written on his license plate. D-FENS, for him to snap and decide to abandon his car because he wants to go home. And we find out that home for him is his estranged wife and daughter who have a restraining order out on him. And on his way home, he gets into a lot of trouble, just causing havoc in the streets and stores of LA, making people miserable, making people who are already miserable more miserable through abuse and his really conservative Eisenhower era ideas of what America should be. And then meanwhile, you have Robert Duvall, who was in the traffic jam and ironically helped move the car out of the street. It's his last day on the job. He's about to retire. His wife is not well mentally, and that's why he's leaving the force. He has a child who died, and his wife's reaction to his child's death put him behind a desk for most of his career. So a lot of his fellow cops don't respect him. He becomes interested in these seemingly unrelated incidents in LA happening throughout the day that he pieces together are all the result of one person. And he decides to go out with a bang and do one big last job on his last day. So that's it. That's the story. And then of course, the two clash at the end. Let's get right into what I know you didn't like about the movie.
Yes.
Robert Duvall's wife. First off, why don't you describe what's happening and then say what you didn't like about it?
What's happening with the wife there's only a couple of scenes, so it doesn't take up too much of the movie. But every time Robert Duvall has to have a conversation with her on the phone, I mean, she's shrill and she's just screechy and, when are you coming home? I can't live without you. I am just having the worst day, and oh my God, it's just the worst. And it feels like it's from a different movie. Like it's so over. It's like she's trying to be like over the top comedic with it, and it's like it just doesn't fit the tone of what's going on at all. And it's just, and it doesn't, for me, it doesn't add too much to the story. I feel like if you just had the Robert Duvall backstory of like, oh, he has to be behind a desk because of X, Y, and Z. This is why he's not respected, but he's going out. It's his last day, even if it was like his last week or whatever, like something like that. I feel like that's still an effective way to have the Robert Duvall character. And I just don't think the wife added anything. And I think it was just like tonally completely wrong for everything, despite Tuesday Weld from Once Upon a Time in America, which we previously covered. Despite she was really going for it, I just think it was just wrong for the movie entirely.
So she's also my favorite part of the movie Thief.
Mm.
She's great. Half agree and half disagree. So there are, like you said, there are only a few scenes. There's 3 scenes where he has to call home throughout the day, and the first 2 I thought were pretty effective in getting across that she's not well, she's really irritating, and that despite all that, he still loves her and wants to take care of her and go home. And in the first 2, yes, it's a little funny, like the cat scratched me and da 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 da.
I'm gushing blood.
Right, I'm gushing blood, and there's no blood. I kind of like those 2. The third one, where he's about to go confront Michael Douglas, and she is screaming at him, and then he finally puts his foot down. And he's like, "No, have dinner ready for me when I get home." None of that worked for me. That was so absurd. And so not what his character really seemed to be about. You really don't need it because moments later, he does stand up to the jerk coworker of his.
To the police captain.
Oh, you're right. He has 2. He stands up to his jerk colleague. He punches him into his cake. And then, he stands up to the captain who plays Raylan Givens' dad in Justified.
Yeah, and Duvall tells him to go F himself on TV. And this was after he had made fun of him for being a guy who never swears.
Right, played by Raymond J. Barry, who's great as the police captain. So my first instinct was maybe they wanted more female characters because the main female character in the movie is Douglas's wife, who is really just a victim throughout the movie. And I have a lot to say about her character. I think it's really interestingly done. And there's a lot to say about it in terms of what you were talking about with how different people might view the movie and how I view the movie differently at different ages.
Yeah.
But then there's also Duvall's partner who is really encouraging him. She's the only one who really encourages him. They're both played by great actresses. Barbara Hershey plays Douglas's wife. And wow, one of the most beautiful women ever. And amazing role. And then Rachel Ticotin, who's so good. We talked about how good she was in Total Recall and how, you don't usually have female leads like that in Total Recall. Also great in this. Mm-hmm. She's popping up a lot on Never Did It, but they're both great. So I don't know if you really, I kind of agree with you. I think you could have just had the backstory of his kid died of sudden infant death syndrome, even though she wasn't an infant, like that plays without the wife.
Right.
So tell me what you did like about the movie.
Well, like you said, the Barbara Hershey part is really good. And it really highlights what a disadvantage that women are at and are still at, with the legal system, because she has a restraining order, but really the restraining order is only going to be as effective as, your local police station is going to deem it to be, because she tries to call, and she tries, because he keeps calling her throughout the day. That's another kind of thing that happens throughout the movie is Michael Douglas, everywhere he comes across a payphone, he's trying to call home, and he keeps warning her. He's like, I'm coming home. He's threatening her, and it's terrifying. And, she's trying to get the help from the police station, and they are really not that concerned about it. She's like, oh, well, he's not here, so we can't really do anything. And they just really kind of blow her off. And it's like, what is she supposed to do? She's already got the restraining order. She's called the police. Like, what else is she supposed to do? And she really plays this, and she's got the kid to worry about. It's the kid's birthday, so she doesn't want to, frighten the kid. She really kind of straddles this line of like just being completely terrified, but being strong for her kid. And it's a small part in a movie that's obviously dominated by this, gigantic, loud performance from Michael Douglas. But Barbara Hershey really does some really cool things with it. And it's really an overlooked part for her.
When I was growing up, my favorite scene in the movie was Michael Douglas killing the Nazi. Now, this last watch through, my favorite scene in the movie is when Barbara Hershey is talking to the cop that comes to her house, and she's telling him why she got the restraining order out on Michael Douglas. And the cop is not grilling her. He's calm with her, but he says, so did he hit you? And she said, no, he wasn't ever abusive to me. He goes, oh, verbally abusive? Yes and no. But, he's clearly a dangerous guy. And he goes, so this guy never hit you. He was never abusive to you. And because the movie focuses so much on Michael Douglas, it's a real Rorschach test for how much of a piece of garbage the viewer is too. Because when I was younger, I thought, wow, Michael Douglas, look at everything he's going through to get to his daughter. And his wife admits that there wasn't that much going on that to get a restraining order. And the cop is like really judgmental of her quietly. He never says anything. I don't know who this guy is who played the cop, C-tier character in the movie, but just with his expression, he shows like he does not respect this woman. Watching it this time, I thought, wow, it's crazy how I interpreted this movie so wrong when I was younger. And it's so clear. The guy is rampaging through Los Angeles. She, of course, has every reason and is correct to be afraid of him. He's coming armed to get her. At first, just with a baseball bat that he steals from a grocer. Later with, a small army's amount of guns. And everyone's
and later a bazooka. He finds a bazooka of all things. Is the
best. So she is correct to be scared. And it's amazing to me, the Rorschach test of it all, where I just had the complete wrong interpretation of her character when I first saw the movie. And I just think it's an incredible scene, smack in the middle, showing that the domestic abuse, the system to fix it doesn't work. Like you said, the station, when she, at the end of the movie, when all the cops leave, the woman says, local election, basically like elections have consequences and there's not enough funding to keep police on the streets in front of your house. And then they leave. And then, of course, that's right when he shows up. Yeah. So it's wonderful. Let's talk about Douglas, because this is really his movie.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
He breaks down immediately. It turns out that he's been fired from his job and has been pretending to go to work for weeks. And he lives now with his troubled mother who collects figurines
and is also afraid of him, by the way,
and is afraid of him. There's a real, like, if Norman Bates's white mother was really alive, how would she react to him? Although I guess you watched Bates Motel, so you know better than I do what the answer to that scene between Robert Duvall and the mother, where he breaks her down, but like breaks down her guard and gets her to talk to him, is wonderful.
Very good.
Man, just talking about this movie makes me like it even more.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, she wonders where he's been eating his lunches that she's been making for him.
Right.
At first, after he abandons his car, he goes into a grocery store, and there's an Asian grocer who he doesn't like the fact that this guy is an immigrant and gouging prices, but the prices are not that bad. And he steals the guy's defensive baseball bat and destroys the store, and then pays for a Coke and leaves.
He pays what he feels is the fair price for the Coke because he wants change to make his phone call. Yeah.
Right, exactly. He only has 10, and if he pays, or 5 or whatever, and if he pays the full price for the Coke, he won't get any coin change for the payphone.
There was something, it was like 85 cents, I think, for the can, and then he'd be left with 15 cents, and he needs like a quarter to make the call or something. Yeah, it was whatever it was something like that, where it wouldn't be enough. Yeah.
Would love to know how they would get around there being no payphones if they wanted to make this movie today, because that's such a key part of the beginning of the movie.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. One, he uses it several times throughout too. He makes several phone calls, and it's a big thing for him.
And destroys one with a machine gun.
Yeah, that's right.
Then he's trying to sit and drink his soda, and a couple gang members come up and bother him. He beats them up with a baseball bat. They try to get revenge. They end up shooting a bunch of random bystanders and pretty mangled in a car crash after.
At least one of them dies, I think.
We don't see any of them die. He does shoot one of them in the leg.
Yeah.
But then a key part of Duvall's detective work later in the movie is convincing one of the gangster's girlfriends to talk to him. Duvall is so great because he's really gentle. He's able to get answers out of people that none of his colleagues can. Like this girl, this gangster's girlfriend, has been called into the police station over and over and over again. She doesn't trust the cops, and she doesn't want to talk about anything because she doesn't want her boyfriend to get in trouble for having weapons. And then Duvall very calmly is like, this is about this. This is not about what you're worried about. This is about something else. And then later in the movie, you get the same attitude when he talks to Douglas's mom, where she's just scared in general, and he talks very calmly to her because he's a gentle guy. And maybe that's another reason you kind of need the Tuesday Weld character, because it shows that he has all this experience talking to people who are not rational.
Yeah.
And aren't going to be eager to give you what you want, but he knows how to deal with those kinds of people.
Mm-hmm. Maybe if they could have just done her a little less comedically over the top.
Well, they definitely didn't need that third phone call. I'll give you that.
Yeah. Maybe that just kind of soured the whole thing.
It was, I mean, I know because you were texting me during that you were mad at him from the first one. So that's fine. But I think that third one really screwed it up.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, Duvall's amazing. We already talked about DeContin and then and Hershey. And that's pretty much it. I mean, do you want to talk about the Nazi scene?
I mean, it's an interesting thing because I know Roger Ebert, I think, brought this up in his review too, about how there'd be a temptation, to turn this into a racial because some of his targets are minorities. But I mean, I don't think that the movie really is going for that. I think the movie is he's targeting whoever's in front of him, sort of thing. And I don't think the movie takes a racial angle to it at all, or I don't that there's really intended to be that. And I think the Nazi part is in there almost for that reason, just to kind of show that he doesn't have that there's no part of him that is doing this because he hates a particular set of people. It's because of everything else that has broken him inside. It's not just the person, it's everything else that's done it to him.
Right. He's a little bit xenophobic. He does say some nasty stuff to the Korean grocer. And then I made a note of this. It's funny that he says and it's not so much just because he's Korean, it's because he doesn't speak English well and because he's price gouging. But then there's a funny counter to that scene where that guy goes to the police station and Duvall's Japanese colleague brings him in and asks him what he's saying in Korean. He goes, I don't know. I'm Japanese. Why don't you know that about me?
Yeah.
I really like that. And it's that even Duvall, who's seen as like this voice of reason and a really nice guy, even he gets it wrong.
Yep.
But I think you're absolutely right about the Nazi scene being in there to show, because the Nazi is very homophobic and misogynistic. DeContin comes in while Douglas is in the store. And this Nazi hides Douglas because he thinks he's a Nazi too, because he has been beating up minorities throughout the movie. But as you said, Douglas immediately argues back. He's like, I'm not like you. I didn't do that for the reason you think I did. So I think you're right. The two most famous scenes in the movie, I think, are the Nazi scene and where Duvall kills his first person. He kills Douglas, this Nazi, and really out of rage, I think, because the Nazi made him. Well, you see, he looks in the mirror while he's doing it too. So he sees himself reflected in the Nazi. He hates it, and he's shooting this part of himself. But also the fast food scene because it's funny.
Yeah,
he goes into a Whammy Burger, which I think is supposed to be a Whataburger or something like that, and he complains. And I actually think this scene I like it, but it does sort of counter what the movie is really about. It's a little too funny. It's a little too cute. And it's a little too like, I hate corporate America too. And it's like, but that's not what you've been mad about.
Right.
You're mad about people. Now, he is mad at corporate America because he got fired from his defense job. I guess that's the government. But for him to go in and be like, the burger you just gave me doesn't look like the burger on the menu, and I want to be able to get breakfast after 10 a.m. I don't know. That seemed like a little cute.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's just, but yeah, that's the scene. I think if anyone remembers one scene from the movie, I think it's probably that one.
Yeah, which is a shame. It's also like the most Schumacher scene of the movie.
Definitely agree.
That's the Batsuit has nipples of the movie. And then it all culminates in this great showdown between Duvall and Douglas on a pier, I think the Venice Beach pier, with the daughter and the wife there. Just a wonderful showdown between two amazing actors.
And I love the Michael Douglas, again, 30-year-old movie, and Michael Douglas. He's so aghast. He's just, I'm the bad guy. Like, he can't believe it. It's like, I'm the bad guy. It's like, yes, or yes, you are.
Yeah. But I love
the way he delivers it is so good. It's just great.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Oh, I'm getting like kind of choked up thinking about it. Duvall also calls him out. He's like, Douglas, he plays proper, because there is this, like, it's like we said, he looked in the mirror, he shot the part of him he hates, but he still has that part of him inside and he won't accept it. Duvall calls him out. He says, you know why you came here. You were going to kill your family and you were going to kill yourself. There's no other way around it. Like, Barbara Hershey runs away with his gun. He brought a live gun. He dies with a squirt gun in his hand, but he had a real gun with him up until that point. But I also love the squirt gun because you're so nervous that Duvall is going to die on his last day. And Duvall was never really in danger, but he didn't know that. But
I didn't know that. I mean, I honestly didn't know that. I'm watching it for the first time 30 years later, and I didn't know.
Right. But for me, it's a relief watching it for probably the 10th time a couple weeks ago and knowing like Duvall's going to be okay.
Yeah.
I gave this movie 4 stars, and there have been times when I've thought more, like 4.5, probably not 5, because there's a few things in it that I think are a little silly. But and now the Tuesday the final phone call really rubs me the wrong way. And even punching what's his name into the cake was a little silly.
Yeah.
4 stars.
Agree. Yeah, I gave it 4 stars. I might be convinced to go a little higher. I mean, just the performances. I like, the more you talk about Robert Duvall, I think you've talked me up a little bit on his performance. I was a little not soft on it, but more just like, yeah, it was good. You know, it was typical Robert Duvall. But I'm like, no, he was actually really good.
Yeah, and the writing is better for him than you think at first blush.
Yeah.
As I was watching it this time, even at first, I was like, oh, they really didn't give him a ton. And then as it goes on, it's like there's a lot there that comes up later. It's a really smart script.
Yeah, and for Schumacher especially, there's a lot of, I mean, there's some stuff that's really over the top in it, but there's a lot of subtlety to it too. Certainly a top probably three or four Schumacher movie for sure.
I haven't seen The Lost Boys, but this is number 1 for me, and then Phone Booth probably right after, and then I don't know.
Yeah, I'd have to look at the list of his. I'm not immediately familiar with his entire filmography right offhand.
Right, but he did give us Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze, so there's that.
And for that, we thank him.
So I don't think this movie was nominated for any Oscars.
It was not. No, yeah. It wasn't.
Do we want to talk about a movie that won a ton of Oscars?
We can talk about that movie. Yes, that movie won a few.
So you gave me Schindler's List. I guess tell me why.
Tell me why. Well, and I asked. I feel like I remember I asked if it was if you wanted to do it. I mean, Schindler's List is I mean, arguably the best film from one of the greatest filmmakers that's ever lived. I mean, it's it's the story of a man who saved, I mean, almost single-handedly saved was 1,100 Jews during World War II, saved them from concentration camps, and it's a complicated story, and he's a really complicated hero, to put it lightly, and we'll talk more about that. But it's such a famous movie. Like I said, it's such a great movie from, like I said, one of our all-time greatest filmmakers, and as a Jew, it's a very important Jewish story, and just seemed like should be something to experience and see once in your life at least.
Yeah, so it took us 2 days to watch it because, for one thing, it's quite long, and for another, we're recording this at the end of 2023, and there's a very difficult war going on in Israel. From a Jewish point of view, I'm half Israeli. From that point of view, from the point of view of dealing with the morality of what's happening on the Israeli side, we're not going to get into the too much of the political aspect of that, but watching a movie about the morality of what people who, well, Oskar Schindler was a known Nazi, but watching people who were Nazis find the humanity in their supposed enemy. This is an interesting time to be watching that movie. I'd never watched it because my father's family are victims. Many of them died during the Holocaust, not at concentration camps, but my father's father and uncle were killed in Odessa, either by Nazis or by, anti-Semitic Ukrainians. They don't know, during the war. And then my father's mother fled from, she was Moldovan, and she fled to Turkmenistan, I think, with her family. And my dad's dad, Lithuanian, got snapped up by the Soviet army and fought with them. And then while my dad's mother was a refugee in Turkmenistan, her sister got married to a Lithuanian guy who was also a refugee there. And when they went back to Lithuania, that's how my grandmother and grandfather met. and then eventually made their way to Israel with my father and my aunt. And then eventually he came to the States and met my mom in Chicago. Anyway, that's a long way to say this movie was always very loaded for me, as it is for most Jews. And I never wanted to watch it. And I always, growing up Jewish and seeing how much of Jewish education is so deeply centered around the Holocaust, I sometimes found myself pushing back against not Holocaust education, because I think everyone should know that happened, but Holocaust films. So the prospect of watching just misery for 4 hours that happened to people who are, like, in a way, my cousins, and then also having these like mixed feelings about how Hollywood has portrayed Jews in general, and in so many times as victims of Nazi torture. I just never felt like watching it. When you assigned it, I was like, now is a good time. And this was before anything happened politically in the world, aside from rising anti-Semitism over the last 4 years, unrelated to Israel in any way. Every year since 2019 is a new record for the amount of anti-Semitic incidents in the world, especially in the United States. So that's a crazy thing to contend with. Anyway, this started to feel like a good time to watch it. And I trust that you're not going to have me watch anything that's too nasty, which is very nice of you, in the face of me making you watch the Snyder Cut.
Yeah.
So there's that. But I did want to know, from your perspective, as someone who converted to Judaism as an adult, what is your connection? Like, how do you feel connected to this movie? Because I know you do, and I want to know what that feeling is.
Well, it's complicated, actually. There's different feelings with it, because as you know, like, and probably most people listening to this know, is that I converted as an adult. I was I was almost 30 by the time I converted. So I grew up in a very, very Christian, I guess, area where there's not a lot of Jewish people, and our education on Judaism was pretty limited. It was, we learned about the Holocaust. We took a trip to Washington D.C. The school did in 8th grade, and we went to the Holocaust Museum. So I've been there. That was the extent of it. We learned about that, but it wasn't much more than that. And I remember watching Schindler's List. I think it was 8th or 9th grade when we watched it in school. And I remember getting through the whole movie. And I didn't cry like the first time when I got through it, but I did, like, as soon as it was over, like, I kind of lost it. Like, and several other people in the class did too, because I think it was after we got back from the Holocaust Museum. So maybe it was in 8th grade was the first time we'd seen it. And it was hard, because we just didn't know. I mean, we learned about it or anything, but like, that was the first time we'd really seen anything like that. And I know it's not a documentary, but it's very competent. Having seen documentary footage of it now, I've seen things like Night and Fog and some of these other things. Having seen that, I mean, I feel like it's about as close as you can get, to what it would have actually looked like. And it was hard. And I think I've only watched it one other time since then. And then the third time was when I watched it for this. But there's also like a weird sense of, like, I don't know if guilt is the right word, but where I feel like I have a connection, to the Jewish people, and, like, to what has happened, to the Jewish people in the past, but also that, like, I don't have family or roots or anything like that. So it's maybe not guilt is the right word, but there's also some part of me that still feels like, well, I'm not as Jewish as somebody, as like you are, or like somebody else would. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but it's incorrect. You are absolutely as Jewish as I am.
And I know, and you and your family have always made me feel that way. And like, and the people at my temple and class have always made me feel that way too. It's a very just internalized thing where I know I shouldn't feel that way, but just sometimes I do, but I do feel a connection to it. And that's why I wanted to convert, because I felt that the first time I went to temple with you was Thanksgiving. It was Thanksgiving weekend. What was it? 2009.
Probably. I mean, I was already living in New York. I remember this day very vividly.
I think it was after I got back from Alabama,
mm-hmm.
because I remember that being a time where I was like, I had to do something, because I had, like, at that point I was like out of options for like jobs and everything else, like I had done. So I was like, well, I've never been to temple, I haven't been to temple yet, because I had never gone, and I always wanted to. But it was, I remember it being over a Thanksgiving weekend. I want to say it was 2010.
Okay.
Because I remember finishing Vivi, my daughter Viv was born. She was a baby when we had like the celebration, that thing. So I remember she was a baby. So I think, I want to say it was like 2010 was the first time I went, and it definitely felt it like, when I was just there, I was like, this feels good. Like, it felt like I hadn't felt at church, before, like, because I was, raised Christian, and we went to church. It wasn't like, we weren't like super, super serious, like, every Sunday you have to be there. And, it wasn't like a huge thing for us, but, it's at a certain point, church just stopped like really feeling anything for me. And when I went to temple, and even still when I go to temple, I feel comfortable in a synagogue, and I continue to as I go now, and I bring my daughter now. And like I said, I've had a kind of sometimes feel a weird guilt, like that feeling that I'm not as Jewish, but not one single Jewish person has ever made me feel that way. And for the most part, like I said, it just it makes me feel joy. And so when I see a movie, try to get through a movie like Schindler's List, it's difficult. I mean, it's very difficult, and it feels personal. Like I said, even though I don't have the relatives that were there, and we've talked about it a little bit in our synagogue lately with like I said, everything that's been going on lately. It's like when it happens to one of us, it happens to all of us, and I think that's a very powerful feeling.
Well, I think there's something to also the fact that, this movie is about how so many people in Europe were wiped out, and the Jewish population was made a fraction of its former self. And so I think you should feel a connection to it, if in no other way, although I think there are many ways, but if in no other way, then you are now helping to carry this forward, for people who were not allowed to do that, not able to do that. I think that's a big deal. And I'm glad that no one has ever made you feel that way. I mean, I know my mom is always like super excited to tell you that you're part of our Jewish family. So, and that's very
I love
true.
that. I love your mom.
Good. She'll probably listen to this. So good. Yeah. Okay, so now that we've gone through 10 minutes or maybe more of our Jewish identities, we should talk about this movie. So, it's interesting. It's very long, and for the first, I don't know, like hour and a half, it feels, I don't want to say procedural, but it's not so emotional right off the bat. And then I can't remember exactly what scene it was in, but a Yiddish prayer called Offen Pripyachek starts playing. And my father sang that to me when I was growing up. And then I was very locked in emotionally to the movie from that point on. I find no fault in this movie except, and I do think it's incredibly well cast. I think I have some issues with Ralph Fiennes' accent. It gets a little distracting at times when it sounds like he's talking with something in a throat, mother. He's talking kind of like this. I'm like, that gets me a little bit. But he does play an evil son of a bitch really well. And even though he is really evil, there is nuance to his performance. I mean, it's that he's mentally ill and he has weird feelings of connection to some of the people he tortures, but there's a lot to the performance. And Oscar Schindler is wonderfully, Liam Neeson in this, I don't want to call it his breakout. I mean, Darkman came out before this, but really this made him a household name.
Yeah.
I guess my only issue is that Ben Kingsley he's an amalgamation character, but he's not Jewish. So to see him do this role, he caught some crap for Gandhi, but I think he is part Indian. Mm-hmm. And he's not Jewish, so it was interesting to see him be the main Jewish role in the film. A lot of the other people in his community are played by Israeli or American or European Jewish actors, so there's that at least. And they're all amazing. There's not a bad performance in the film. In fact, Ralph Fiennes is the only thing that's weird in the movie. Mm-hmm. The escalating scenes of torture and desperation are really tough. I would absolutely recommend that folks who watch this also watch Come and See, which I think is a Polish film that talks about the Russian experience of the war, which is also just dreadful, sort of the partisan fighting in the woods kind of experience of the war in a really in an equally visceral, torturous way. Where like you've got films like Defiance, which I think are pretty solid about like Lithuanian partisans. Mm-hmm. And that was an important part of Holocaust history, but not as viscerally told. So yeah, amazing. This movie was written by
Steve Zaillian.
Yeah, Steve Zaillian, and the reason for that is this movie was originally going to be directed by Martin Scorsese. Spielberg eventually decided he wanted to direct the movie, so he gave Scorsese Cape Fear and took over directing Schindler's List, which I think was absolutely the right choice, and I'm glad that it worked out that way. But now because of that, Zaillian has written a film that Spielberg made. He's obviously written plenty of movies that Scorsese made. They're regular partners. He also wrote Moneyball. He wrote The Night Of, and I think he directed most of The Night Of. Yep. He wrote Awakenings. He wrote Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. So he's worked with Fincher. He's worked with Ridley Scott. He's worked with Sidney Pollack. He's kind of the most decorated writer in Hollywood.
It's kind of not. He should be more of a household name.
Yeah. So pretty incredible. Tell me more about what your feelings on the movie.
Yeah, as a movie, like you said, even just technically as a movie, I mean the score, John Williams, of course, who does all the Spielberg movies, I mean the score is beautiful. I mean the black and white, the cinematography, I mean it looks amazing. Liam Neeson's performance, yeah, as a guy who is, like I said, he's a Nazi. He wears a Nazi pin on his lapel through the entire movie. Literally until like his very last scene in the movie, he has, he wears his Nazi pin, and to watch him, the kind of the transformation that he undergoes, because really he starts off kind of as a guy, he doesn't set out like to save Jews in the beginning. At first he's just, wants to have his profitable factory, and he just wants to make money, and he likes hobnobbing with the Nazis. I mean, he's friends with the Ralph Fiennes character, who is just an abject monster from the start, and he even defends him at one point. I think says, war brings out the worst in everyone or something. Like, so he's got his flaws. He's kind of almost hard to like at first, but then once he realizes what he can do, and what he's capable of doing, and then starts doing, and you really see Liam Neeson again. He undergoes the transformation. We've talked about this with some other movies too, like in war films, where there's not like a big showy perform really until the end of the movie. You don't see like a lot of big outbursts from Liam Neeson, like really until that last scene he has, where he just kind of like quietly undergoes this transformation, as he's kind of realizing the power that he has and what he's capable of doing to save these people. It's a really great performance.
I kind of bumped up against that scene at the end where he has his breakdown, and my wife really bumped up against it. The style of the movie changes quite a bit. It becomes more of a 1940s like Casablanca kind of, big emotional outburst at the end. I mean, Casablanca is not that emotional at the end, but
yeah,
it's kind of silly actually. Casablanca is kind of a silly movie, to its credit.
Love it.
But yeah, I do too. Neeson he goes from being a playboy throughout the whole movie and being cool as a cucumber throughout the whole movie to, just like you said, to having his big, like, I could have done more, I should have done more. If I had sold this car, I would have saved X amount of lives. It's very, the dialogue is very powerful. The delivery is a little hammy. It's not hard to go with it, and most people did and should. It's 2023. We're cynical. Sometimes you bump against these kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Actually, I left out, I should say, the reason, and this is quite relevant to any time, the reason Spielberg decided that he wanted to take over directing the movie is because the Berlin Wall had fallen, which led to a big wave of neo-Nazism in Europe and a rise in anti-Semitic incidents. So because of that, I was happy to see him do The Fabelmans recently, which personalized and expressed his Jewish upbringing for the world. So I'm glad that he took a really hands-on touch approach to this movie. Is there anything else we should touch on? Mel Gibson almost played Oscar Schindler.
Oh, man, would that have aged poorly?
Yeah. Dustin Hoffman was supposed to play was offered the Ben Kingsley role, but turned it down. And I feel like that's a bit of a miss. I think Kingsley is amazing in this film.
For being not, yeah, I mean, he's not Jewish, and yeah, that's kind of but yeah, he's really, really good in it. Yeah.
To me, complaining about, and I am complaining about it, but complaining about Kingsley getting this role instead of Hoffman is kind of like the people who today complain about Bradley Cooper doing Maestro when Jake Gyllenhaal wanted to do it. The difference being Hoffman didn't want to do it.
Right.
So it's different. But the same in that Cooper is great, just out of this world in Maestro. And I saw it 2 days ago. And although by now everyone's probably seen it by the time this comes out.
Oh, by the time. Yeah.
I think Hoffman would have been great in the Kingsley role also, though.
I think, I mean, sometimes he can be a little goofy, but I think, he would have understood. I think he could have done it.
Anything else you want to say about the movie itself?
Well, a key part in it too is, what's her name? Miss Honey from Matilda.
Yeah.
Embeth Davidtz has a really pivotal part too. And when you mentioned Ralph Fiennes kind of has some complicated feelings. I mean, he definitely has feelings for her as a Jewish woman, and that that brings out some complicated feelings for him too. And she's also, again, as everybody, very, very good in this part. Just kind of, I'm just so used to seeing her as Miss Honey. We've seen Matilda in our house like 50 times, and I had kind of forgotten she was in this. But yeah, she's excellent as well.
No, it's a very important role. In fact, there's a lot of sort of today, I don't want to say forgotten, but unsung performances in the movie. Hers being key because she is one-on-one dealing with Amon Goths, the Nazis. Not Wrath, he's in love with her, but he hates Jews because he's a Nazi. He's a real for deal Nazi. I liked this whole angle. I am glad it was in it. I don't 100% know what was trying to be accomplished with it, except that, you could take it just as this is another form of torture that people endured in the camps. Like she was forced to be his assistant. He was constantly sexually attacking her and dealing with her in that way. But also like Mike Evenier's character, he played Goldberg, who was a cop, like a Jewish cop for the Nazis.
Right.
That was very interesting. They didn't get too into that, although they showed that he got special treatment. But in the end, he still ended up at the camps. Jonathan Segal, who played Pfefferberg, was really good. He's the Israeli actor who was sort of like the avatar for your average person, your average Polish person who pulled into the camps. And he and Goldberg were these like con men in their town, and then they became victims like everyone else, just trying to survive. The thing that I'd like to talk about before we wrap things up is the end of the movie where Schindler has gone off. He knows he's going to get arrested. There's two ends. There's two endings. There's the narrative ending to the movie, and then there's the coda. The narrative ending is interesting because Schindler has liberated the camp. He has convinced the Nazis to leave without firing a shot, because why should you kill more people when you're about to be accused of some gnarly stuff?
Yeah.
You don't want to make it worse for yourself. You've lost this war. So he gets the Nazis to leave, and then he himself knows he's going to be arrested, and he and his wife leave. And so the Jews are just there and sort of trying to figure out what they should do next. And a single Russian soldier shows up and quote unquote liberates the camp, and they ask where they can go. And he says, well, don't go east because they hate you there. And maybe don't go west either. And the message is there are two places for you to go. One of them is America, where roll the dice, try your luck. And the other is Israel, which exists for a reason. And the reason is this. And I'm glad that scene was in the movie. It's be like, yep, this is why this happened. There is no other place for sure that's safe for a group that has been scapegoated and murdered and genocided for thousands of years. And then the coda is in Israel, in Jerusalem, in a cemetery I visited. And I hope you're able to do that one day too, where the real people who the actors are based on walk with the actors to Oskar Schindler's grave. He's buried in Jerusalem, and put a stone on his grave. And it's just beautiful.
And Ben Kingsley walks with Itzhak Stern's widow to do that. Just, yeah.
Yeah. And the little boy in the toilet walks with, the man who was that boy, or who that boy is based on. That's a crazy scene where this little boy is running all over the camp trying to find a place to hide, and ends up having to hide in a toilet. And then you see there's 5 other kids there.
Yeah.
And when I say a toilet, I mean like it's a latrine. So where all the feces are. I mean, it's brutal. This movie's tough. I'm sure a lot of the people who are listening to this have seen it. If you haven't, give it a shot. Take your time with it. It's no less impactful if you watch it in installments, even though movies aren't, meant to be watched that way. I think it's okay to take breaks if you need them.
Mm-hmm. Agree. I mean, even though some movies are bigger than Oscars, I can hit the Oscar history of Schindler's List real quick. I did pull that up here. It won 7 out of a possible 12 that it was nominated for. It was a winner for picture, of course, best picture, director for Spielberg. Steve Zalian did win for the screenplay. Janusz Kaminski for cinematography. It was also a winner for art direction and film editing, and John Williams for the score. The ones that it did not win, Liam Neeson lost out for best actor. Ralph Fiennes did not win for supporting actor. And then it also lost out for costume design, sound, and makeup. So it kind of covered a lot of those. And an also interesting note is that Jurassic Park came out that summer, and that won the awards for sound mixing, sound editing, and visual effects. So Spielberg movies won 10 Oscars that year.
What a crazy year for him. Who beat Fiennes and
Neeson?
Neeson.
Yeah. Neeson lost to Tom Hanks for Philadelphia. And Fiennes lost to Tommy Lee Jones from The Fugitive.
Well, you can't fault those too much. Those are some great performances.
Great performances, great movies. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't complain either way in that case.
It's not like the movie didn't get its awards.
Right. It got its flowers.
For sure. Okay, so I have a top 10, but I have some
I can do honorable mentions.
Honorable mentions, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so first my honorable mentions. Dazed and Confused, really fun. True Romance, just for the origin of Tarantino of it all. He wrote that film. It's got his vibe. Coneheads, we've talked about on the podcast a few times. This is a movie that deserves to be reckoned with. It's a very funny comedy. And The Sandlot, just a really wonderful, wonderful coming of age baseball movie. What are your honorable mentions?
Yeah, I should have The Sandlot on my 1993 list. I guess I haven't watched it in a while. But yeah, I would probably throw that at least in my honorable mentions. Looks like I've got Wayne's World 2 in 1993. I enjoy Wayne's World 2. Not as good as the first one, but I still like it. There's a Clint Eastwood movie that came out that year that he directed called The Perfect World, which I've always really liked. True Romance is another one of my honorable mentions from that year, same as yours. There's a Jim Sheridan movie starring Daniel Day-Lewis called In the Name of the Father that is very good. And also the Tim Burton, Henry Selick, Nightmare Before Christmas. I like, but I don't love it as much as some other people do. But it's an honorable mention. I enjoy it.
Daniel Day-Lewis had a big year that year. Age of Innocence, also a good movie, came out that year. Yep. I'm sure I have a feeling you'll be talking about that in a minute. All right. So my number 10 is Jurassic Park. We talked about that a bit. It's Jurassic Park. I'm not saying more about it.
Yeah. Yeah. 10 for me is Demolition Man.
I love Demolition Man. It's my number 5.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I love it. It's great.
Yeah. Number 9 for me is Falling Down.
Number 9 for me is Falling Down.
Number 8 for me is The Nightmare Before Christmas.
Nice. Good. 8 is Dazed and Confused for me.
Number 7 for me is Last Action Hero. So I had originally said we were going to talk about this a lot in our 1993 podcast. Obviously, we're not doing that. But Last Action Hero, and I've said this on the podcast a few times before, is an amazing send-up of Arnold's career in general and action movies writ large. John McTiernan directed it, and you should watch it. Absolutely.
I'll put it on my list because I have never did it. That makes my number 7 movie is What's Love Got to Do with It? The Tina and Ike Turner biopic. My wife and I watched it this year after she passed away, and it's very, very good.
I've never did it either. Annie loves that movie. My wife loves that movie.
It's very good.
My number 6 is Mrs. Doubtfire. This movie got me through my parents' divorce. Yep. I like it. I like it so much, mostly because in the end, the parents don't get back together, which is every other divorce movie for kids ever.
Mm-hmm. Number 6 for me is Jane Campion's The Piano.
Never seen it. Dude, 93. What a crazy Holocaust movie year. Number 5 for me. Jane Campion's The Piano? What am I thinking? Is that a Holocaust movie? No, it's not.
Oh, wait. No, that's one where Holly Hunter is mute.
I'm thinking of The Pianist. Yeah.
Yeah, that's Polanski.
Right. The Piano. Never seen the Harvey Keitel's in The Piano, right?
Harvey Keitel is in The Piano. Also Sam Neill. Yeah.
Yeah. I've never seen it.
And Anna Paquin won an Oscar when she was like 11.
Right. I mentioned number 5 for me is Demolition Man.
Nice. Yeah. Number 5 for me, as you mentioned earlier, is The Age of Innocence.
So if you want to watch Scorsese do a stuffy movie that does move, and also Michelle Pfeiffer is hot, Age of Innocence.
Yeah.
Number 4 for me is Grumpy Old Men, one of the best comedies of the 90s. Just watched it recently because I'm watching every Walter Matthau movie. I've watched 21 movies in a month. And this is near the top. I'm obsessed with this movie. I was worried it wouldn't hold up. It absolutely holds up. Matthau and Lemon are hilarious. Kevin Pollak and Daryl Hannah have nice little roles in it. Even Christopher McDonald has a nice little role in it. And Anne Margaret as the plot engine of the movie is also very good. And Ozzie Davis, don't want to leave him out. He's great too, but not in too much of the movie. And Burgess Meredith. There is so much to love about Grumpy Old Men. That's my number 4.
I probably haven't seen it since it came out, but I do remember loving it at the time. So I'd be happy to revisit it. Number 4 is a movie I did revisit recently, and it is a movie I still love. It's called The Fugitive.
I haven't seen it in so long that I don't have it on my list, but I remember very vividly watching that at summer camp, at sleepaway camp, and being like, this movie's crazy.
Yeah, it still is, man. It's great. Harrison Ford, it's probably might be his best performance.
I buy it. Great. I totally buy that. My number 3, we talked about it a bit earlier, is Philadelphia. The movie that Tom Hanks beat Liam Neeson for the Oscar for.
Man, why don't I have that in my 1993 either? That's weird. I should have that.
But you don't. Let's keep going.
But I don't. So my number 3 in that case is Jurassic Park.
You got it. Well, that was my number 10. My number 2, I think, is also your number 2. It's Groundhog Day.
Exactly. Yep. Number 2 is Groundhog Day. Just a movie I literally watch it every year, and I laugh just as hard at the same parts every year.
It started a whole genre of time loop movies.
It did. Yeah. There's a whole list. Do you have a list of those on Letterboxd?
I don't know. I may have deleted it, but I mean, The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, Boss Level, Palm Springs, excuse me.
Yeah.
So there's so many. And then number 1 is Schindler's List.
Has to be. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on this very personal episode of Never Did It. We're taking a couple weeks off of the yearly check-ins and talking about a couple of our favorite directors over the course of the next 2 weeks. Next week, we're going to be coming back with a retrospective of Alexander Payne's films. So stay tuned for that. If you want to know what is coming out next week, go to our Letterboxd profile. You can find me at Brad Garoon on Letterboxd. I think, Jake, you're Jake Ziegler on Letterboxd.
Yep, it's Jake_Ziegler.
And both of us have pinned to our profiles our Never Did It podcast list. You could also just search for the Never Did It podcast list. And the 2 movies that will be discussed on next week's episode are always at the top of that list. So check that out. And thank you for joining us for Never Did It.